I stood in my kitchen at 7 in the morning, coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips, staring at my childhood bedroom window where my estranged brother Danny was casually hanging curtains. My parents' sister Sarah and her husband Greg were unloading a moving truck in my driveway. They hadn't spoken to me in 5 years, not since I lost my construction job, and they told me I was no longer family. Now they were moving into my house like I didn't exist. My hands trembled as I set down the mug, watching these people who once called me son and brother, treating my property like their own. The sight triggered memories I'd buried, deep memories of that devastating day, 5 years ago, when everything changed. Back then I was 23, fresh out of my electrician apprenticeship program and optimistic about the future. The construction industry was booming, and I had steady work wiring new housing developments around Phoenix. I'd saved enough for a down payment on this modest 3-bedroom ranch house in Tempe, complete with a 2-car garage that I'd converted into a workshop for my side carpentry projects. Then the recession hit like a sledgehammer. Construction projects dried up overnight. The company I worked for, Henderson Electric, laid off half their crew in a single afternoon. I remember walking to my beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot, carrying a cardboard box with my tools and a severance check that wouldn't cover 2 weeks of bills. I called my father Robert first. He was a successful insurance broker with Southwestern Mutual, pulling in 6 figures annually selling policies to small businesses across the valley. His voice turned cold the moment I explained my situation. "Marlin, you're 23 years old. A man doesn't go running to his parents when things get tough. Figure it out yourself." My mother Linda, a real estate agent with Desert Dreams Realty, was even harsher when I tried again 2 weeks later. Unemployment benefits barely covered groceries, and I was drowning in mortgage payments. "We raised you to be independent," she said, her voice sharp through the phone. "If you can't handle basic adult responsibilities, maybe you weren't ready to buy a house. We're not going to enable your poor decisions." My sister Sarah, 3 years older and working as a registered nurse at Banner Desert Medical Center, delivered the final blow when I showed up at her apartment complex, desperate and defeated. "You know what, Marlin? Maybe you're not really part of this family if you can't even support yourself. Real men don't come begging for handouts. We're done helping you." Her husband Greg, a finance manager at a car dealership, stood behind her, nodding. "Sarah's right. You need to learn some personal responsibility." Even my youngest sibling Danny, who was only 20 at the time and still living with our parents while attending Arizona State University, wouldn't take my calls. When I tried visiting the family house on Maple Street where I'd grown up, Robert threatened to call the police if I didn't leave immediately. "You made your choice when you bought that house you couldn't afford," he said, standing in the doorway like a bouncer. "You're not our problem anymore. Don't come back here." I spent the next 6 months fighting to keep my house, taking whatever work I could find. I delivered pizzas at night, worked construction cleanup during the day, and sold plasma twice a week just to make partial mortgage payments. The bank started foreclosure proceedings, but I managed to negotiate a modification that lowered my payments just enough to hang on. Slowly, painfully, I rebuilt. I started taking on small carpentry jobs, fixing kitchen cabinets and building custom shelving for neighbors. Word spread about my craftsmanship, and within 2 years I had enough steady work to start Henderson Woodworks, my own custom furniture business. By year 4, I was employing 3 other craftsmen and had a waiting list of clients wanting handmade dining tables and bedroom sets. Now, watching my family unload their belongings onto my property, all those painful memories came flooding back. But something else bothered me even more. How did they know where I lived? How did they get keys to my house? And why were they acting like they owned the place? I walked outside, my bare feet cold against the concrete driveway. Sarah looked up from a box labeled kitchen items and dropped it immediately, her face going white. "Oh my God," she whispered, stumbling backward. "Marlin, but you can't be what?" I demanded, my voice hoarse with shock and anger. "Can't be standing on my own property wondering why my family is stealing my house." Robert emerged from behind the moving truck, his insurance salesman composure completely shattered. "This isn't possible. You're supposed to be..." "Supposed to be what?" I stepped closer, my confusion growing by the second. That's when my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who lived next door and always kept track of neighborhood happenings, came rushing across her yard with her Yorkshire Terrier Buster yapping at her heels. "Marlin, thank heavens you're alive," she exclaimed, grabbing my arm with surprising strength for her 78 years. "Sarah told everyone you died in a car accident 3 years ago. She even showed us the obituary from the Arizona Republic. There was a memorial service and everything." The world tilted sideways. I stared at Sarah, whose face had gone from white to green. "What did you tell people you..." Mrs. Patterson kept talking, oblivious to the family drama unfolding. "Your sister organized such a beautiful service at Desert Palms Chapel. She gave the most touching eulogy about how much she missed you. Said you were driving to California for a job interview when your car went off the road near Flagstaff. Closed casket, of course, because of the, well, you know." I felt like I was drowning in confusion. "Sarah, what is she talking about?" My sister couldn't meet my eyes. Greg stepped in front of her protectively, but his face showed he was just as shocked as everyone else. "Sarah, you said he was dead. You showed me the death certificate." We..." Sarah started crying, but these weren't tears of joy at seeing her supposedly dead brother alive. These were tears of panic, the kind someone sheds when their lies finally catch up with them. Danny dropped the box he was carrying, and I heard glass breaking inside. "Sarah, you told us he died. Mom and Dad planned the whole funeral. We all wore black suits. Linda finally appeared from inside my house, carrying my favorite coffee mug, the one with the Henderson Woodworks logo I'd had made 2 years ago. When she saw me standing there, she dropped it. The ceramic shattered against the driveway, and the sound seemed to break whatever spell had kept everyone frozen. "This can't be happening," she muttered. "You're dead. The insurance company paid out. We have the paperwork." That's when everything clicked into place. They hadn't just abandoned me 5 years ago. They'd systematically erased me from existence, told everyone I was dead, and somehow profited from my supposed death. And now they were here in my house, acting like they owned it. I realized this wasn't just about family abandonment anymore. This was about something much darker, much more calculated, something criminal. The next morning I drove straight to the Tempe Police Department, but Officer Martinez told me that family disputes over property usually needed to be handled through civil court unless there was clear evidence of criminal activity. The fact that my family had told people I was dead wasn't technically illegal unless they'd used that lie to commit fraud. "Do you have reason to believe they've gained financially from claiming you were deceased?" he asked, taking notes in a small pad. I thought about Linda's comment about insurance companies paying out. "I think so, but I need to investigate first." I spent the rest of that Tuesday making phone calls to everyone I could think of from my old life. My former co-worker at Henderson Electric, Jake Morrison, answered on the 3rd ring. "Marlin, Jesus Christ, man, I thought you were dead. Your family sent flowers to our Christmas party 3 years ago with a card saying they were honoring your memory. Boss man even gave a little speech about workplace safety." My high school friend Tony Valdez had a similar reaction. "Dude, your sister called me right after it supposedly happened. She was crying, said you'd been driving to some job interview in Los Angeles and went off the road near Flagstaff. Said the car burned up so bad they couldn't even have an open casket. I felt terrible for not staying in touch better." Each conversation revealed more details about the elaborate lie my family had constructed. According to the story they'd spread, I'd been struggling. Financially got desperate and taken a risky construction job in California. The fictional car accident happened on Interstate 40 during a snowstorm, and my body was supposedly so badly damaged that DNA identification took weeks. But the most shocking revelation came when I called my old insurance company, Globe Life, where I'd maintained a small term life policy from my electrician days. The customer service representative, Jennifer Walsh, sounded confused when I identified myself. "Sir, I'm showing that policy was paid out 2 years ago following the policyholder's death. A claim was filed by the beneficiaries with a certified death certificate, and we issued payment of $50,000. My hands went numb. Who were the beneficiaries? Let me pull up those records. It shows Robert Henderson listed as father, Linda Henderson listed as mother, and Sarah Martinez listed as sister. The claim was processed without any red flags since all the documentation was in order." I hung up and sat in my truck outside the insurance office, trying to process what I'd learned. My family hadn't just told people I was dead for emotional reasons or to avoid embarrassment about our estrangement. They'd forged legal documents, filed fraudulent insurance claims, and collected $50,000 by pretending I'd died. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was organized fraud. Over the next 3 days, I conducted my own investigation while my family continued living in my house like nothing had happened. I parked across the street each morning, watching them load and unload boxes, hang pictures, and generally make themselves at home. Danny had even set up what looked like a gaming station in my living room. I followed up with Mrs. Patterson, who showed me a sympathy card Sarah had sent her after my supposed death. The card was expensive, embossed with gold lettering, and included a professional photograph of me from my high school graduation that I'd never given to anyone outside the family. She also started a little memorial scholarship at Phoenix Community College. Mrs. Patterson explained serving me tea in her kitchen while Buster snored on a cushioned chair. $500 a year for students studying construction trades, said it's what you would have wanted. The memorial scholarship detail made my stomach turn. They'd not only profited financially from my fake death, they'd used it to make themselves look like generous, grieving family members in the community. I drove to Phoenix Community College and spoke with the financial aid office. Sure enough, the Marlin Henderson Memorial Scholarship existed, funded by his loving family, and awarded annually to deserving students pursuing careers in construction and electrical work. The scholarship coordinator, Ms. Rodriguez, showed me a framed photo of me that hung in the financial aid office, along with a small plaque describing my tragic death and promising future cut short. "Your family seemed so devastated," she said. "Your sister Sarah comes by every year for the award ceremony. She always gets emotional talking about how proud you would have been." That evening, I sat in my truck watching my family through my own living room windows. They'd hung new curtains, rearranged my furniture, and appeared to be having some kind of family dinner at my kitchen table. Danny was laughing at something Greg had said while Linda served what looked like her famous pot roast. They'd created this perfect little fantasy where I was conveniently dead, they were the tragic survivors, and my house was somehow theirs to claim. But I still didn't understand how they'd managed to actually move in. Even with fraudulent death certificates, they couldn't just take ownership of my property without some kind of legal process. I called my mortgage company, Desert Southwest Credit Union, and asked to speak with someone about my account status. After verifying my identity with my social security number and mother's maiden name, the representative pulled up my file. "Mr. Henderson, I'm showing some unusual activity on your account. About 18 months ago, we received documentation indicating you'd passed away, and the property was being transferred to your family members as part of your estate. However, our records show you've continued making payments electronically this entire time. What kind of documentation?" "A death certificate and what appears to be a will designating your father as executor of your estate. But honestly, sir, the whole situation has been flagged as questionable because your payments never stopped. We've been meaning to investigate, but since the account remained current, it wasn't a priority." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Do you still have copies of those documents?" "I can make copies for you, but you'll need to come in person with proper identification to review them." The next morning, I sat in a small conference room at the credit union, staring at documents that made my blood run cold. The death certificate looked official, complete with raised seals and official signatures. But the will was what really shocked me. According to this document, I'd supposedly written out detailed instructions leaving my house, my business, and all my possessions to my family members with Robert named as executor. The will even included personal touches that made it seem authentic, referencing family memories and expressing forgiveness for our estrangement. Whoever had written it knew details about my childhood, my business, and my personal relationships that only family members would know. But there was one problem with their perfect forgery. I'd never written a will, and more importantly, the signature at the bottom wasn't mine. I'd found my smoking gun. Armed with copies of the fraudulent documents, I decided it was time for a direct confrontation. I couldn't prove yet how they'd gained access to my house, but I had enough evidence to show they'd been systematically defrauding insurance companies and financial institutions. I waited until Thursday evening when I could see through my living room windows that the whole family was gathered together. Danny was playing video games on my couch while Robert read a newspaper in my recliner. Sarah and Linda were doing dishes in my kitchen, and Greg was watching television. I walked up to my own front door and rang the doorbell. Sarah answered, and her face immediately crumpled when she saw me standing there. "Marlin, please don't do this. You don't understand the situation we were in. I understand that you filed fraudulent insurance claims using my name," I said, holding up the folder of documents I'd collected. "I understand that you forged a death certificate and convinced our entire community that I was dead. What I don't understand is how you think you can just move into my house and act like it belongs to you." Robert appeared behind Sarah, trying to maintain his insurance salesman composure, but clearly rattled. "Son, we can explain everything. Why don't you come inside so we can discuss this like adults?" "Don't call me son," I snapped. "And this is my house. You're going to explain everything right here, right now, or I'm calling the police." That's when Sarah broke down completely. She collapsed against the doorframe, sobbing hysterically. We didn't have a choice. Marlin Gregg lost his job 2 years ago, and we defaulted on our mortgage. We were going to lose everything. Greg stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. The dealership downsized, and I got laid off with no severance. We burned through our savings trying to keep up with payments on a house we couldn't afford. Linda emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel that belonged to me. "We were desperate, Marlin. You have to understand we were facing bankruptcy. We would have lost our home, our cars, everything we'd worked for. So you decided to steal from me instead." I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. "You declared me dead collected insurance money and somehow convinced yourselves that justified stealing my property." Robert's composure finally cracked. "You abandoned this family 5 years ago. You cut off all contact for all we knew. You really were dead somewhere, living under a bridge. Or worse." "I didn't abandon anyone," I shouted. "You kicked me out. You told me I wasn't family anymore because I lost my job. You refused to help me when I was struggling, and now you want to play the victim because you stole my identity and committed fraud." Danny finally spoke up from behind them, his voice quiet and guilty. "Marlin, there's something else you need to know. We've already sold the house." The world went silent except for the sound of my heart hammering in my chest. "What do you mean, sold?" Linda looked like she wanted to disappear. "We listed it 3 months ago. We have a buyer and the closing is scheduled for next Tuesday." I stared at them in disbelief. How is that possible? "You don't own this house. I own this house. I've been making mortgage payments this entire time." That's when Robert delivered the blow that nearly brought me to my knees. "Actually, son, you don't own this house anymore. You signed it over to us before you died." He disappeared inside for a moment and returned with a folder thick with legal documents. "Everything's been properly transferred through Linda's real estate office. As far as the state of Arizona is concerned, this property belongs to the Henderson Family Trust with me as the executor." I grabbed the documents with shaking hands and flipped through page after page of property transfer forms, quit-claim deeds, and estate paperwork. Every document bore my signature, but I'd never seen any of these papers before in my life. "You forged all of this," I whispered. Linda's real estate training kicked in, and she started speaking in professional tones that made my skin crawl. All the documentation has been properly notarized and filed with Maricopa County. The title company has already approved the transfer. The new buyers, a nice young couple named Johnson, are putting down $200,000 in cash. $600,000 total, Greg added with what sounded almost like pride. Way more than you originally paid for it. The market's been really good to this neighborhood. The scope of their betrayal was so massive I could barely comprehend it. They hadn't just told people I was dead or filed a single fraudulent insurance claim. They'd created an entire parallel legal reality where I'd died, willed them my property, and they were the legitimate owners selling to unsuspecting buyers. How many times have you done this? I asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah and Greg exchanged glances. Linda suddenly became very interested in the dish towel in her hands. Danny looked like he was going to be sick. It was Robert who finally answered, and his words chilled me to the bone. Your grandfather William's farm was getting too expensive to maintain. He was 92 years old and showing signs of dementia. We had to make some difficult decisions about his care. Grandfather William died 3 years ago, I said slowly. You told me he had a heart attack and that there wasn't time for a funeral because he'd requested immediate cremation. He was suffering, Linda said defensively. The nursing home costs were bankrupting him. We helped him transition into a better situation. You declared him dead too, didn't you? The realization hit me like a physical blow. You used the same scam on your own father. Robert's silence was all the confirmation I needed. How many others, I demanded, how many people have you supposedly killed off to steal their property? Danny finally found his voice, and what he said made me understand why he looked so guilty. Marlin, they made me help with some of it. I was supposed to be the computer expert, setting up fake social media accounts and email addresses to make the deaths look more believable. But I never knew how far it would go. There's a whole system. He continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. Mom has contacts at the county recorder's office who don't ask too many questions about estate transfers. Dad knows people at the insurance companies who can fast-track claims. Sarah has access to medical records that help make the death certificates look legitimate. And you've been doing this to multiple families. Sarah was crying again, but these weren't tears of remorse. These were tears of someone who'd been caught and was facing consequences for the first time. It's not like we wanted to hurt anyone. These were people who were already isolated, already estranged from their families. We weren't taking anything from people who would miss it. People like elderly relatives with dementia, I said. People like estranged sons who'd been cut off from their families. People who were basically already dead to us anyway, Robert said, and the coldness in his voice revealed who he really was underneath the insurance salesman charm. I looked at these people who'd raised me, who'd shared Christmas mornings and family vacations with me, and realized I was staring at strangers. Worse than strangers. I was staring at predators who'd turned targeting vulnerable family members into a business model. The house sale is in 5 days, Linda said, checking her phone. The buyers have already done their final walkthrough and approved everything. Their loan is approved and they're ready to close. We could work something out, Robert suggested, slipping back into negotiation mode. Maybe we could cut you in for a percentage of the sale price. After all, you've been maintaining the property nicely. The fact that he thought I might be willing to profit from their crimes showed how completely he'd lost touch with basic human decency. Get out of my house, I said quietly. All of you, get out right now. Or what? Greg asked, stepping forward aggressively. You'll call the police. With what evidence everything we've done is perfectly legal according to the paperwork trail. You're the one who's going to look crazy claiming to be someone who's been dead for 3 years. He was right, and we all knew it. The documentation they'd created was sophisticated enough to fool insurance companies, banks, and government offices. A single police officer responding to a family dispute wasn't going to unravel their entire operation in one night. But as I walked away from my own front door, unable to enter my own home because my family had changed the locks, I realized something important. They'd made one critical mistake in their perfect crime. They'd picked the wrong victim this time. The next morning, I sat in Detective Maria Torres's office at the Tempe Police Department, surrounded by boxes of documents and feeling like I was trying to prove my own existence. Detective Torres, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and tired eyes, listened patiently as I explained the entire situation. Mr. Henderson, I'm not going to lie to you. This is one of the most complex fraud cases I've ever encountered. The documentation your family has created is extremely sophisticated. They've essentially constructed a parallel legal reality where you died, and they're the legitimate heirs to your property. She spread out photocopies of the forged documents across her desk. Look at this death certificate. It has all the right seals, proper signatures from officials who actually exist, and it's been filed with the appropriate state agencies. Someone with serious knowledge of government processes created this. But it's still fraud, I insisted. I'm sitting right here. I'm clearly not dead. Absolutely, but proving that in court is going to take time. Meanwhile, your family is selling your house in 4 days to buyers who have no idea they're purchasing stolen property. Detective Torres explained that identity theft and estate fraud cases often took months or even years to fully investigate and prosecute. The property sale would likely be completed long before the criminal case made it to trial. However, she continued, there is something interesting about your case. You mentioned your family might have done this before to other relatives. My grandfather definitely, probably others. That changes things. If we can prove this is an ongoing criminal enterprise rather than a single incident, we can get federal agencies involved. Insurance fraud across state lines becomes an FBI matter. She picked up her phone and dialed an extension. Agent Walsh, I've got a case you're going to want to see. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from FBI agent Jennifer Walsh, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who specialized in financial crimes. When I mentioned the insurance payout from Globe Life, her eyes lit up. Globe Life. We've been investigating some suspicious activity with their claims processing. Several policies paid out in the Phoenix area over the past 3 years with questionable documentation. Your case might be the missing piece we've been looking for. Agent Walsh pulled out a tablet and showed me a map of Arizona with red dots scattered across the Phoenix metropolitan area. Each of these dots represents a suspicious death claim filed in the past 4 years. Look at this pattern. She zoomed in on the map and I could see that many of the red dots were concentrated in areas where Linda's real estate office had listings. Other clusters appeared near hospitals where Sarah worked, and several more were near businesses that bought insurance policies from Robert's agency. We think there's an organized network operating in the valley targeting vulnerable individuals and using sophisticated document forgery to steal identities and property. Your family might be the key to breaking this entire operation. How many people are we talking about? Agent Walsh consulted her tablet. Based on the suspicious claims we've identified so far, at least 15 individuals have been fraudulently declared dead in the past 4 years. Total financial loss is estimated at over $2 million in insurance payouts and property theft. The scope was staggering. My family hadn't just targeted me and my grandfather. They were part of a criminal network that had systematically murdered people on paper to steal their assets. The good news, Agent Walsh continued, is that we've been building a case for months. We have undercover agents in place, financial surveillance on key suspects, and cooperation from several insurance companies. Your family just doesn't know it yet. She showed me surveillance photos of Linda meeting with an unidentified man outside a coffee shop, Robert having lunch with someone who worked at the county recorder's office, and Sarah accessing computer terminals at the hospital during times when she wasn't scheduled to work. We believe your mother is the connection to a document forging operation run out of a copy shop in Mesa. Your father provides inside information about people who might be vulnerable targets through his insurance client base. Your sister accesses medical records to create believable death scenarios. What about Danny and Greg? Your brother appears to be more of a reluctant participant, mainly handling social media manipulation and online identity management. Your brother-in-law seems to be muscle helping with property access and intimidation of anyone who asks too many questions. Over the next 2 hours, Agent Walsh laid out the full scope of the investigation. The FBI had identified a network of at least 20 people involved in various aspects of the fraud operation, from document forgers to corrupt government employees to real estate agents who specialized in estate sales. Your grandfather, William, is particularly interesting, Agent Walsh said, pulling up another file. We have records showing his death was reported, insurance claims were filed, and his property was sold. But we can't find any actual burial records or cremation documentation. What does that mean? It might mean your grandfather is still alive somewhere. These fraudsters prefer to target people who are isolated and unlikely to be missed, but sometimes they get sloppy. If someone disappears but doesn't actually die, they might be living under a different identity to avoid their families. The possibility that Grandfather William might still be alive hit me like an electric shock. If he was out there somewhere, he could be a witness to the entire operation. He might even have evidence that could bring down the whole network. But Agent Walsh also delivered sobering news about my immediate situation. Even though we know your family is involved in criminal activity, we can't arrest them until we're ready to take down the entire network. If we move too soon, other members of the operation will disappear and we'll lose our chance to stop them permanently. So they're going to sell my house? Probably. But here's what you don't know yet. The buyers, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, are undercover FBI agents. The entire sale is a sting operation designed to catch your family in the act of completing a fraudulent transaction. I felt a surge of hope for the first time in days. So you'll arrest them at the closing? Not just them. We'll be conducting simultaneous raids on the document forging operation, the corrupt government employees, and several other targets across the valley. Your family's house sale is going to trigger the takedown of the entire network. But Agent Walsh's next words brought me back to reality. The problem is, this investigation has revealed just how deep the corruption goes. Your family has been operating with inside help from people in positions of trust. County employees, insurance adjusters, medical records clerks, even some police officers. She showed me an organizational chart that looked like something from a mob investigation. Lines connected dozens of names showing relationships between corrupt officials, document forgers, and the families like mine who carried out the actual fraud. Your case is going to expose a level of institutional corruption that's been going on for years. There are going to be a lot of powerful people who want this investigation to disappear. As I left the FBI office that afternoon, my head was spinning with the magnitude of what I'd stumbled into. My family's betrayal of me personally was just the tip of an iceberg that threatened to bring down dozens of people and expose systemic corruption throughout Maricopa County. But there was something else Agent Walsh had mentioned that I couldn't stop thinking about. If Grandfather William was still alive, where was he? How had he been surviving for 3 years after his supposed death? And most importantly, did he know what had happened to me? That evening, I sat in my truck across from my house, watching my family prepare for their big payday. Through the windows, I could see them packing boxes and cleaning, getting ready to hand over their property to the undercover FBI agents who were pretending to be buyers. They had no idea they were walking into the biggest sting operation in Arizona history. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there were still pieces of this puzzle I didn't understand. How had they gained access to my house initially? How did they know I wouldn't come home and catch them in the act? And why did Danny keep looking guilty about something more than just social media manipulation? The answer to those questions would come sooner than I expected, and it would change everything I thought I knew about my family's betrayal. 3 days before the scheduled closing, I received a phone call that changed everything. I was sitting in my truck outside a McDonald's eating dinner and trying to figure out where I was going to sleep that night when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Marlin Henderson?" The voice was elderly male and strangely familiar. "Yes, who is this?" "This is your grandfather, William. I understand we need to talk." I nearly dropped the phone. "Grandfather William, but we had a funeral." "I'm very much alive, Marlin. And I've been waiting 3 years for the chance to take down the people who destroyed our family. Agent Walsh told me you've finally surfaced and are willing to fight back. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the parking lot of a Denny's restaurant in Scottsdale watching an old man with a silver beard and walking cane approach my truck. When he got closer, I recognized the eyes immediately. These were the same blue eyes that had taught me how to whittle wood and fix bicycles when I was 8 years old. Grandfather William. He climbed into my passenger seat with surprising agility for someone who was supposed to have died 3 years ago. Hello, Marlin. I've missed you more than you can imagine. The story he told me over coffee and pie in that Denny's booth was even more shocking than everything I'd already learned. When Robert and Linda had declared him dead, William had actually been living in an assisted living facility in Tucson, paying for his own care with Social Security and savings from the sale of his farm years earlier. I started getting suspicious when your sister Sarah visited and began asking detailed questions about my finances, my will, and whether I had any friends who checked on me regularly. William explained. She wanted to know if anyone would notice if I suddenly stopped coming around. Then the facility started receiving calls from people claiming to be my family, saying I'd died and they needed to collect my belongings. When I investigated, I discovered someone had filed a death certificate and was trying to claim my life insurance. William had realized he was being targeted by his own family, but instead of confronting them directly, he'd done something brilliant. He'd faked his own disappearance. I withdrew all my money in cash, checked myself out of the facility, and started living under a new identity. My friend Harold Jameson had died 6 months earlier with no family. So I borrowed his Social Security number and started a new life. But why didn't you contact me? Why didn't you try to warn me? Because I didn't know where you were and I was afraid they might be monitoring my communications. Your family told everyone you'd moved to California and cut off all contact. I assumed you were safe. Over the past 3 years, William had been conducting his own investigation into the fraud network. Using his background as a retired accountant and his new invisible status, he'd been tracking financial records, following money trails, and documenting crimes. I've been working with FBI agent Walsh for 8 months, providing evidence and helping them understand how the operation works. We've been waiting for the right moment to spring the trap. He opened a briefcase that contained hundreds of pages of documents, photographs, and financial records. I've documented at least 12 other cases where families use this same method to steal from elderly or estranged relatives. The total theft is closer to $3 million. But there's something else you need to understand, Marlin. Your family isn't just greedy. They're genuinely dangerous. When people have gotten too close to exposing them, bad things have happened. William showed me a newspaper clipping about a man named Frank Morrison who'd been asking questions about his supposedly dead brother's estate. Frank had died in what appeared to be a random mugging, but William had evidence suggesting it wasn't random at all. They've graduated from document fraud to actual violence when necessary. That's why we've had to be so careful about building the case. But William also had good news. Tomorrow, when your family attempts to complete the sale of your house, they're going to be arrested as part of the largest fraud bust in Arizona history. We're taking down the entire network simultaneously. What about my house? The sale to the undercover agents will be completed as part of the sting operation, but the property will immediately revert to you once the fraud is proven. You'll also receive compensation from recovered assets seized from the criminal network. William explained that the FBI had been tracking bank accounts, real estate holdings, and other assets belonging to the fraud network. When everything was seized and liquidated, victims would be compensated for their losses. The insurance companies are also facing lawsuits for not properly investigating suspicious claims. You'll likely receive additional compensation from their settlement funds. But the best part of William's plan wasn't financial. It was personal. I've been in contact with several other victims of your family's schemes. People whose relatives were supposedly dead but who suspected something wasn't right. Tomorrow, they're all going to get the shock of their lives when they learn their loved ones are actually alive. He showed me a list of names and phone numbers. These are families who thought they'd lost grandparents, uncles, aunts, and siblings to your family's fraud. When this all comes out, we're going to have a reunion that makes national news. We spent the next 3 hours going over every detail of the plan. The FBI had been surveilling my family for months, documenting their activities and building an airtight case. Tomorrow's closing was designed to be the culmination of their investigation. But there's one more thing, William said as we prepared to leave. Danny has been secretly working with the FBI for 6 months. What? Your brother contacted Agent Walsh last year. He'd been keeping records of everything the family was doing because he felt guilty about participating. He's been an informant helping us understand the operation from the inside. This explained why Danny had looked so guilty and why he'd seemed less enthusiastic about the house sale than the rest of the family. He'd been documenting their crimes while pretending to participate. He's the one who told us about your grandfather's supposed death. William continued. That's how the FBI first connected your case to mine. Danny's been trying to find a way to make things right without getting himself killed in the process. Are you serious? Dead serious. Tomorrow, when the arrest happened, Danny will be taken into custody like the others for his own protection, but he'll be released immediately as a cooperating witness. The rest of your family is going to prison for a very long time. As we parted ways that night, William handed me a key. This is to a storage unit in Mesa, where I've been keeping evidence and some personal items I wanted to save from my old life. But more importantly, it's where I've been keeping something that belonged to you. What? The woodworking tools your great-grandfather used to build furniture in the 1930s. I saved them when your family cleaned out my house after my supposed death. I thought you'd want them for your business. I drove to the storage unit that night and spent hours looking through boxes of family history that William had rescued from my family's destruction. There were photo albums, military service records, handwritten letters from relatives I'd never met, and yes, a complete set of hand-forged woodworking tools that were older than my grandfather himself. But what moved me most was a journal William had been keeping throughout his 3 years of hiding. Page after page documented not just the crimes he was investigating, but his grief over losing his family to greed and corruption. The final entry, written just 2 weeks earlier, brought tears to my eyes. I learned today that my grandson Marlin is alive and fighting back. For 3 years, I thought I'd lost everyone I cared about to this evil that's infected our family. Tomorrow, we're going to end this nightmare together. I can't wait to teach him how to use his great-grandfather's tools. As I sat in that storage unit at midnight surrounded by salvaged pieces of my family's real history, I realized that William and I weren't just fighting to recover stolen money or property. We were fighting to reclaim our family's honor from the people who'd tried to destroy it. Tomorrow, justice would finally be served. Tuesday morning arrived gray and overcast with the kind of desert clouds that promised rain but rarely delivered. I sat in a rented Honda Civic across the street from Southwest Title Company, watching my family arrive for what they believed would be the completion of their perfect crime. Agent Walsh had positioned me where I could see everything but remain hidden. Through my earpiece, I could hear FBI communications as teams prepared to execute simultaneous raids across the valley. "Bravo team in position at Desert Dreams Realty," came a voice through my earpiece. "Target Linda Henderson's office is under surveillance." "Charlie team ready at Southwestern Mutual Insurance," reported another agent. "Target Robert Henderson is currently at his desk." At exactly 10:15, my family's vehicles pulled into the title company parking lot. Robert driving his silver Lexus sedan, Linda in her white BMW SUV, Sarah and Greg together in their red Honda Pilot, and Danny arriving separately in his black Jeep Wrangler. Through Agent Walsh's earpiece briefing, I learned that the title company had been cooperating with the FBI for weeks. The conference room where the closing would take place was equipped with hidden cameras and microphones. Every word my family spoke would be recorded as evidence. "The buyers, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, are Special Agents Martinez and Chen from our Phoenix field office," Agent Walsh's voice explained through my earpiece. "They've been undercover for 3 months, posing as a young couple relocating from California for tech jobs." I watched my family enter the building carrying folders of documents and wearing their most professional attire. Robert had on his best Navy suit, the one he wore for important insurance presentations. Linda was dressed in her top-selling real estate agent outfit, complete with expensive jewelry and a briefcase. They looked like successful business people completing a routine transaction. They had no idea they were walking into the culmination of a federal investigation that had taken 2 years to develop. "All teams, this is command." Agent Walsh's voice came through the earpiece. "Targets are entering the building. Execute in T-minus 30 minutes." Through the title company's front windows, I could see my family being led into a conference room by the title company representative, who was actually an undercover FBI agent. Moments later, 2 people I assumed were the fake buyers entered the building. "Phoenix PD units are in position around the property," another voice reported. "No unauthorized vehicles in the area." The next 20 minutes felt like hours. I knew that inside that conference room my family was signing documents transferring fraudulent ownership of my house and accepting payment for stolen property. Every signature they made was another felony charge. At exactly 10:45, Agent Walsh's voice crackled through the earpiece. "All teams execute now." What happened next was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance of law enforcement. FBI agents in bulletproof vests burst through the front doors of the title company while unmarked cars surrounded the building. Through the windows, I could see my family's shocked faces as agents entered the conference room with weapons drawn. Simultaneously, my earpiece filled with reports from other raid locations. "Bravo team has secured Desert Dreams Realty. Linda Henderson's business partner is in custody." "Charlie team has arrested Robert Henderson at Southwestern Mutual. No resistance." "Delta team has the Mesa copy shop surrounded. Document forgers are surrendering." But the most satisfying moment came when I saw my family members being led out of the title company in handcuffs. Robert's insurance salesman composure had completely cracked. He was shouting something about lawyers and constitutional rights while an FBI agent read him his Miranda warning. Linda looked like she was in complete shock, staring at the handcuffs as if she couldn't believe they were real. Sarah was crying hysterically, and Greg kept demanding to know what was happening. Danny, however, played his part perfectly. As Agent Walsh had explained, he would be arrested along with the others to protect his identity as an informant, then quietly released once they were out of sight of any potential network associates who might be watching. "That's a wrap on the Henderson family operation," Agent Walsh announced through the earpiece. "Targets are in custody and being transported for processing." But the coordinated arrests were just the beginning. Over the next 6 hours, I listened through my earpiece as the FBI simultaneously raided 17 other locations across the Phoenix area. Copy shops that specialized in document forgery. County recorder offices where corrupt employees had been filing fraudulent paperwork. Insurance company offices where adjusters had been fast-tracking suspicious claims. By evening, 37 people had been arrested in what the local news would later call Operation Dead Reckoning, the largest identity theft and fraud bust in Arizona history. But the most emotional moment of the day came when Agent Walsh called me with an update I wasn't expecting. "Marlin, we need you to come to our Phoenix field office. There are some people here who want to meet you." When I arrived at the FBI building an hour later, I was led into a conference room where I found myself face to face with 8 people I'd never met, but who had something important in common with me. "Mr. Henderson," Agent Walsh began, "I'd like you to meet some other members of families who were victimized by your relative's fraud network." The introductions that followed were surreal. Margaret Chen, whose uncle supposedly died in a nursing home fire that never happened. David Martinez, whose grandfather allegedly suffered a fatal heart attack, but was actually living in a retirement community in Nevada. Patricia Johnson, whose elderly aunt supposedly died in her sleep but had actually been forced to flee to California to escape her family's attempts to steal her property. "We've all been living with the grief of losing loved ones," Margaret explained. "Your family didn't just steal money and property. They stole years of our lives that we spent mourning people who weren't actually dead." But the reunions planned for the next day would be even more emotional. Agent Walsh had contacted the supposedly dead relatives, and they were all flying to Phoenix to be reunited with families who thought they'd lost them forever. Your grandfather William has been particularly helpful in locating these people, Agent Walsh explained. He's been maintaining contact with several of them during their years in hiding. The scope of the emotional damage caused by the fraud network was staggering. Dozens of families had spent years grieving loved ones who were actually alive, but in hiding. Children had grown up believing their grandparents were dead. Spouses had remarried thinking their partners had died. The good news, Agent Walsh continued, is that in addition to the criminal prosecutions, we're working with social services and family counseling organizations to help these families rebuild their relationships. But she also warned that the legal process would be lengthy and complex. Your family's case is relatively straightforward, but some of these fraud schemes go back 8 or 9 years. Untangling all the financial and legal damage is going to take time. As for my immediate situation, Agent Walsh had encouraging news. The fraudulent sale of your house has been voided, and you'll have full access to your property by tomorrow morning. The title has been cleared, and your mortgage company has been notified that you're very much alive. What about the money they stole? The $50,000 from your life insurance will be returned with interest. The real estate profits from your house sale attempt will be part of the assets seized from the criminal enterprise. You'll also be eligible for victim compensation funds that are being established. But beyond the financial recovery, Agent Walsh emphasized the broader impact of the case. This investigation has revealed systematic corruption in multiple county offices, insurance companies, and other institutions. There are going to be policy changes, new oversight procedures, and criminal prosecutions that extend far beyond your family's specific crimes. As I drove home to my house for the first time in a week, I reflected on how completely my world had changed. 7 days ago, I'd been a successful small business owner, living a quiet life in suburban Phoenix. Now, I was the key witness in a massive federal fraud case that would make national headlines. But more importantly, I had my grandfather back, I had my house back, and I had the satisfaction of knowing that the people who tried to erase me from existence were facing justice. The only question remaining was what would happen to my family relationships in the aftermath. Robert, Linda, and Sarah were facing serious prison time. Greg would likely receive a lighter sentence in exchange for cooperation. Danny would avoid prosecution entirely because of his cooperation with the FBI. But the deeper question was whether any family relationships could be salvaged after such profound betrayal. Could I ever forgive people who declared me dead for money? Could we ever rebuild trust after they'd tried to steal my entire life? Those were questions that would take much longer than a criminal investigation to answer. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse listening to Judge Patricia Morrison sentence the last member of the fraud network that had tried to erase my existence. The courtroom was packed with victims, FBI agents, and media representatives covering what had become known as the Phoenix Death Fraud Conspiracy. Robert received 12 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. The judge specifically noted that as the ringleader who recruited other family members into the scheme, he bore the greatest responsibility for the emotional and financial damage caused to dozens of victims. Mr. Henderson, you used your position as an insurance professional to identify vulnerable targets, then exploited family relationships to carry out systematic fraud, Judge Morrison stated. You turned what should be sacred bonds of trust into tools for criminal enterprise. Linda received 10 years and permanent revocation of her real estate license. The judge emphasized that her use of professional real estate connections to facilitate document forgery had corrupted an entire industry network that would take years to reform. Sarah's sentencing was the most emotional part of the process. She'd cooperated extensively with prosecutors, providing detailed information about the medical records fraud and expressing genuine remorse for her actions. The judge sentenced her to 5 years of probation and 1,500 hours of community service working with elderly victims of financial fraud. Ms. Martinez, your cooperation has been noted, but your abuse of your position as a healthcare professional to facilitate these crimes represents a profound violation of trust, the judge explained. Your community service will help you understand the real human cost of what you participated in. Greg received 2 years of probation after testifying that he'd been manipulated into participating by threats that his family would lose their home without the fraud proceeds. His cooperation in explaining the intimidation tactics used by other network members helped prosecutors secure additional convictions. Danny was granted complete immunity in exchange for his cooperation as an informant. His 18 months of secretly documenting the family's crimes had provided the foundation for the entire federal investigation. But the most satisfying moment came when the judge addressed the broader impact of the case. This investigation has revealed systematic failures in oversight and verification procedures across multiple institutions, Judge Morrison announced. As a result of evidence presented in this case, new federal regulations will require enhanced verification procedures for death certificates, estate transfers, and insurance claims. The victims of this conspiracy have helped prevent future crimes against thousands of other families. The financial recovery was substantial. In addition to the $50,000 from my fraudulent life insurance claim being returned with interest, I received over $200,000 from the liquidation of assets seized from the criminal network. The life insurance companies also settled a class action lawsuit for their failures to properly investigate suspicious claims. More importantly, 16 families were reunited with relatives they'd believed were dead. The emotional scenes at Sky Harbor Airport when supposedly dead grandparents, uncles, and siblings stepped off planes to embrace family members who'd been grieving for years made national news and brought positive attention to the victims' recovery process. Grandfather William and I had developed an incredible partnership during the months of investigation and trial preparation. He'd moved into the renovated guest bedroom of my house, and we'd been working together to rebuild Henderson Woodworks into something that honored our family's real legacy. Your great-grandfather would be proud of what you've built here, William said as we worked side by side in my expanded workshop, using the century-old hand-forged tools he'd rescued from the fraud network's destruction. These tools were meant to create beautiful things not to be sold off by thieves. The woodworking business had grown exponentially during the months of media attention surrounding the case. Customers wanted to support a fraud victim who'd fought back, and orders for custom furniture had increased, to the point where I'd hired 6 additional craftsmen and moved into a larger workshop space. But the most meaningful aspect of the business expansion was the apprenticeship program William and I had established. We were teaching traditional woodworking techniques to young people aging out of foster care, providing them with both job skills and the kind of family mentorship that had been stolen from me for 5 years. Everyone deserves to have family that builds them up instead of tearing them down, William explained to our first class of apprentices. Real family teaches you skills, supports your dreams, and helps you become the best version of yourself. My relationship with Mrs. Patterson had also blossomed into something like a surrogate mother connection. She'd moved her daily activities to include regular visits to our workshop, bringing cookies for the apprentices, and serving as an unofficial grandmother figure for young people who'd never had stable family relationships. I always knew something wasn't right about that funeral, she confided over Sunday dinner. Your sister's tears seemed more panicked than grief-stricken, but I never imagined anything this elaborate. The community support had been overwhelming. When local news stations covered the story of my family declaring me dead to steal my house, donations poured in from across the country. People sent money materials for the workshop and letters of support from other victims of family financial fraud. The most touching letter came from a woman in Oregon whose brother had attempted a similar scheme. Reading about your fight gave me the courage to contact law enforcement about my own family's crimes, she wrote. Because of your story, I'm getting justice too. 1 year after the arrests, I received an unexpected visitor. Sarah showed up at my workshop on a Tuesday afternoon looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen her. I know you probably don't want to see me, she said, standing uncertainly in the doorway, but I needed to tell you something. I gestured for her to sit on one of the workbenches while William discreetly moved to the back of the workshop to give us privacy. Marlin. I need you to know that I never understood how much pain we were causing until I started working with fraud victims during my community service. I met a 90-year-old woman whose family had stolen her house and convinced everyone she was dead. She spent 3 years living in her car because she was too ashamed to tell anyone what happened. She was crying, but these tears were different from the panicked tears I'd seen during her arrest. These were tears of genuine understanding and remorse. I can't undo what we did to you, and I can't undo what we did to Grandfather William or any of the other families. But I wanted you to know that I'm spending every day for the next 4 years trying to help people recover from crimes like the ones I helped commit. What about Greg? How are you managing? We're separated. He's living with his parents while we figure out if our marriage can survive what we put each other through. The kids are staying with me, and we're all in counseling to deal with the trauma of learning that their mother is a convicted criminal. She paused, looking around at the workshop and the apprentices who were learning to create furniture instead of destroy lives. I need to ask you something, and I'll understand if the answer is no. Would you be willing to let my kids visit Grandfather William sometimes? They never got to know him before we stole him from their lives. They're 8 and 11 now, and they're old enough to understand that what we did was wrong, but they're also old enough to benefit from having a grandfather who could teach them things. It was William who answered, stepping forward from where he'd been listening. Sarah, those children are innocent victims of your choices. Of course they're welcome here. Family isn't something you can steal or destroy with fraud. Real family is something you choose to build with love. Over the following months, Sarah's children, Emma and Michael, became regular visitors to our workshop. They learned basic woodworking skills, heard stories about their family's real history, and experienced what healthy family relationships looked like. Watching William teach his great-grandchildren the same skills he'd once taught me created a healing that I hadn't expected. The fraud network had tried to destroy our family by erasing people from existence, but we were rebuilding something stronger through honest relationships and shared purpose. Danny eventually moved back to Phoenix after completing his degree at Arizona State University. He'd changed his major from computer science to social work and was planning to specialize in helping families recover from financial crimes. I want to spend my life helping families heal instead of helping them destroy each other, he explained during one of our monthly dinners together. The Henderson Woodworks Apprenticeship Program had grown into a nonprofit organization that provided job training, family mentorship, and housing assistance for young people aging out of foster care. We'd expanded into 3 workshop locations, and were teaching everything from furniture making to home renovation to small business management. These kids deserve what we all deserved, William often said during our program orientation sessions. They deserve family that believes in their potential and gives them tools to build a successful life. The media attention had eventually faded, but the positive impact of our story continued to spread. Law enforcement agencies across the country were using our case as a training example for investigating family fraud. Insurance companies had implemented new verification procedures that prevented thousands of fraudulent claims. County recording offices had upgraded their systems to make document forgery much more difficult. Most importantly, hundreds of families had been reunited with relatives they'd believed were dead, and new support networks had been established to help families recover from identity theft and estate fraud. 2 years after my family tried to erase me from existence, I stood in my expanded workshop watching William teach a group of apprentices how to use hand planes to create smooth surfaces on rough lumber. The afternoon sun streamed through skylights, illuminating sawdust dancing in the air and highlighting the concentration on young faces as they learned skills that would serve them for a lifetime. Mrs. Patterson sat in her favorite chair in the corner, reading a book while keeping one eye on the apprentices like the grandmother many of them had never had. Sarah's children were building a birdhouse under William's patient guidance, learning that their family history included much more than fraud and betrayal. Danny stopped by after finishing his shift at the family counseling center where he now worked. "How's everyone doing today?" he asked, surveying the productive scene. "We're building," I said, gesturing at the furniture taking shape on workbenches around the room. "We're building furniture. We're building skills. We're building relationships. And we're building the kind of family that actually means something." That evening, as William and I sat on my back porch watching the sunset over the mountains, he handed me a letter that had arrived in the day's mail. "This is from your great-great-grandfather's sister in Minnesota," he said. Apparently, our family fraud case made national news, and relatives we didn't even know existed have been reaching out to connect with us. The letter was from my great-great-aunt Helen, now 96 years old, who wanted to share family photos and stories that went back to the 1800s. She'd included pictures of ancestors using the same woodworking tools that now filled my workshop, along with handwritten recipes, family stories, and genealogy information that revealed a rich family history spanning multiple generations. Real family doesn't end with death certificates or fraudulent paperwork, William said as we looked through the photos together. Real family extends backward through generations of people who built things, created things, and passed down knowledge and values that matter. And real family extends forward too. I added, thinking about the apprentices who were learning not just woodworking skills, but also how to treat people with honesty and respect. As night fell over Phoenix, I reflected on the question that had haunted me throughout this entire experience. What does family actually mean? I'd learned that family isn't defined by blood relationships or legal documents. Family isn't something that can be stolen through fraud or destroyed through betrayal. Real family is built through choices people make every day to support each other, teach each other, and help each other become better versions of themselves. The people who'd raised me had chosen greed over love, deception over truth, and personal profit over family bonds. They'd tried to erase me from existence because they valued money more than relationships. But the family I'd chosen to build afterward was stronger than what I'd lost. William had chosen to spend his final years teaching young people instead of nursing resentment about what had been stolen from him. Mrs. Patterson had chosen to become a grandmother figure to apprentices who needed family support. Danny had chosen to dedicate his career to helping families heal from financial trauma. Even Sarah was choosing to spend years making amends for the damage she'd helped cause. And I'd chosen to use my second chance at life to create something meaningful, something that would help other people avoid the isolation and betrayal that had nearly destroyed me. Late that night, as I walked through my workshop one final time before locking up, I paused at a wall where we'd hung a simple wooden sign that one of our first apprentices had carved. Family. Not just who you're born to, but who you choose to build a life with. I'd learned that when people try to erase you from existence, the best response isn't revenge or bitterness. The best response is to build something so meaningful, so filled with purpose and love, that it becomes impossible to ignore. My family had said I didn't have a family, then tried to move into my house behind my back. But they were wrong about everything. I did have a family. I just had to build it myself, one relationship at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one choice to love instead of exploit at a time. And the family I built was stronger than anything they could have stolen from me. Have you ever had to rebuild important relationships in your life after experiencing betrayal or loss? Sometimes the families we choose become more meaningful than the ones we're born into. I'd love to hear about your own experiences with finding people who truly support your dreams and help you become your best self. Please share your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit the like button to help others find it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and building meaningful relationships, and please share this with anyone who might need to hear that it's possible to rebuild after betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you have the power to create the family and life you deserve, no matter what obstacles you're facing.